the financial crisis when Barack Obama had the nerve to say, quote, "You don't blow a bunch of cash in Vegas when you're trying to save for college." And Nevada officials had a meltdown like you've never seen before, including Harry Reid. You would have thought that he kicked their dogs or singled them out personally. They had this performative, over-the-top, NIMBY response, which is frankly kind of how politics should be played, right? You should defend the area you represent, the people you serve, the folks who elected you. But like even Larry Hogan, a guy who was talking about primarying Trump, is just caving and scared to respond. And it is so sad to watch.
So a few weeks ago when Trump told 4 congresswomen of color to leave America, his White House staffers went on background to tell reporters that they thought that the president's racism was a bit too far, or at the very least, some White House staffers and Republican senators said was a politically dumb move. Now, according to the Washington Post, the president's advisors say his racist attacks are good for him because they're galvanizing support with, quote, the white working class voters he needs to win re-election in 2020. So I guess points to them for just finally admitting that getting white people to be angry and afraid of black and brown people is the president's central political strategy. Is that where we are now? They're just open about it?
Yeah, it's interesting. It is the opposite side of, we had this, remember we talked about the difficult challenge before Democrats of kind of like having to navigate through the laser beams like Catherine Zeta-Jones. Donald Trump does have his version of that, which is the opposite of our task, right? Because he does need to, this is reductive, but there are people who are inclined to hate Trump but feel good about the economy. He needs them. And there are people who are inclined to like Trump but feel terrible about the economy, and he needs them too. And so whenever he is bragging about the economy, it's in part about, look, am I a piece of shit? Sure, but how bad are things for you? Not so bad. But this is the other side of that, something he also needs to do, which is convince people who are not doing well, who wanted more change in the system, who were sympathetic to Trump on trade and immigration especially, to say, see, I'm still fighting for you, by using these kind of racial tropes and these battles as a stand-in for the battle they're looking for him to wage, the kind of cultural battle they're looking for him to wage.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very clear what he's trying to do here. It's been clear for a long time. Republicans have tried to do this for a long time. The people who live in rural America and exurban America have been left behind in many ways by the global economy. They're not doing that well. And, what Trump is telling them is, it's not my fault. It's the Democrats' fault. It's the Democrats' fault because they spend all this money on these cities. These cities are getting all this money for what? It's corrupt. That's partly why Trump added, because this wasn't in the Fox News segment, Trump added, we should investigate Elijah Cummings.
Right,
we should investigate because
Everybody.
somehow all of your tax dollars are going to help all these city people and they're still trash. And you, the hardworking people of rural America, are getting nothing. Because what's not going to be good for Trump is if the hardworking people in rural America realize that his only 2 policies in his economic agenda are to cut taxes for rich people and have trade wars all over the world that are fucking them over.
Yeah, just a quick update. I just Googled Larry Hogan, and he has called the comments outrageous and inappropriate, which is better, but I would argue still completely feckless, and there's absolutely no reason that should take this much time. So, Larry, comment still stands. Like the political whitewashing of this racism is deeply frustrating to me. Obviously, there is historical evidence that racist political ads and attacks work, and purely nativist sentiment can be effective. We remember the Willie Horton ad. There's not a lot of difference between that and the caravan stuff we saw in 2018. But I do think right now Trump is in a situation that's completely the reverse. If he would stop being racist, if he would stop tweeting this racist nonsense, he could probably do better with suburban women, which are the key to Democrats winning in 2020 and are key to why we took a bunch of House seats in 2018. So when it gets spun as some sort of political strategy or political brilliance, it's deeply frustrating because we also know that this nonsense usually arises because his dander gets up because of literally a Fox and Friends segment. It's every time it's the same exact thing.
Yeah, and what I think this is interesting too. Trump's nativism and racism turning off college-educated voters. We saw that in 2018 in a huge way.
Right.
But Ron Brownstein had a piece in The Atlantic a couple days ago where he notes that polling throughout Trump's presidency has indicated that his belligerent and divisive nature raises concerns among white working class women. who've been drifting away from him since 2016. And a new set of focus groups from Democratic pollster Stan Greenberg shows that this gender gap among the white working class is hardening in small town and rural communities. So Trump support, again, among non-college educated white males, as strong as it's ever been, if not stronger. But non-college educated white women might be some of those voters who are cross-pressured, right? Who might think, you know, the economy overall is doing okay. My life is not doing so great, or I'm not, you know, financially better off. But Trump is just part of it is Trump starting all of these fights, picking all these battles, going on all these racist tirades isn't just offensive to some of these voters and some people. It's also like, dude, why aren't you working on fixing everything in this country? You're not governing. You're not making anyone's lives better. All you're doing is just getting into these fucking arguments.
63% of voters said the tweets attacking the squad crossed the line, and 57% said they do not think he respects racial minorities. I mean, that's a pretty overwhelming number in the Trump era. That would worry me if I were his advisors trying to spin some nonsensical strategy about this being a pre-planned strategy to win over voters or get his base excited. Like we are a little far out from the election to be having a get my base excited strategy with pure racist tweets. That is absurd on its face.
Yeah. Lovett, did you have something you wanted?
No, yeah, I mean, no, I think that's right. It's just also a little bit like, you know, the Republicans are, you know, they're going to go into this campaign with Trump, and they know that they have this vice grip between the fact that a generic Republican would be performing much better because of the basic economic realities in the country right now. Trump loses a lot of those people, so they have to make it up somewhere. How are they going to make it up? Well, they think they're going to make it up by shoring up his base, but of course, shoring up the base costs him amongst the voters who would otherwise vote for a generic Republican in an economic situation like we're in. So they have this kind of, you know, they're trying to get 2, lose 3, get 3, lose 2, and it's, you know, Democrats have the opposite challenge.
I just think you can shore up the base without this sort of double-edged sword type messaging, right?
Well, they don't figure it out.
They're much more, They're much more palatable message, like on immigration policy or healthcare, whatever. There's a million different ways you could go at this, and they just choose not to for some reason. The one thing I just want to point out that really pissed me off this weekend was the Washington Post had a long profile of Jared Kushner, and that's fine, whatever. Like, it was about how he's now, on top of failing to accomplish anything policy-wise in the White House, is now basically running the campaign. He was supposed to be this moderating force with Ivanka. We've all mocked that narrative for years and sort of long ago abandoned it. But he didn't get pressed on now being in charge of a White House and a campaign that is openly spinning that their approach is going to be overt racism. And that's frustrating. And I think he should be.
Remember when Jonathan Swan pushed him on this during their Axios interview 10 times? Is the president racist? That was right before these two very, you know, that was direct racist tirades.
It was like putting cotton candy in a bucket of water.
Yeah, and I'm not criticizing the reporters or the piece. I thought it was interesting, but I guess I am. It should be front and center of what we're talking about here. That was great reporting by Swan. When Chris Wallace over the weekend pushed Mick Mulvaney, the chief of staff, on these racist tweets, he did a great job of trying to hold him accountable. That should be a piece of every story written on these goobers. Don't give them some whitewashed, you know, take on their role.
Well, what Republicans want to do with this is say, if you disagree, if the president criticizes anyone, or if you disagree with anything that the Democrats say, you're called racist or sexist. That's what they want this campaign to be about, right? So we talked a lot about the need to condemn this president's racism, call it out as a strategy, and then sort of talk about Trump's failure on a whole host of issues. Well, according to a report released by the Commerce Department on Friday, the economy only grew by 2.1% in the second quarter this year, the weakest increase since the first quarter of Donald Trump's presidency. The new report also includes revised data for last year that found the economy never reached the administration's 3% growth target for 2018. Yep. This was a favorite talking point of theirs. So is it time, or is it smart for Democrats to start talking about the Trump economy, and not just the Trump economy, but specifically, I think, the Trump economic agenda, which so far has been tax cuts for the rich and trade wars and nothing else?
Oh God, yes. I mean, I think we should be calling him a failed president on basically every front. I mean, and I don't think that means criticizing his inability to reach 3% GDP. I don't think those are the terms we want to talk about it. And I think it's like, you're a failed president. The country is succeeding in spite of you. Americans are working harder to overcome your trade war, to overcome your tax cut for billionaires, your corporate giveaways that have hurt them. Jason Furman, who we used to work with at the White House, pointed out that business investment outside of oil and mining is actually slowed during the Trump administration.
That was really interesting.
Yeah, Trump and Chris Wallace again over the weekend reminded us all that Trump promised that he was going to balance the budget in 5 years. He's utterly failed on that front. So everything he said he would do, he has failed to do. He's lucky that he inherited a strong economy with a lot of tailwinds from Obama. Now his only economic policy is to browbeat the Fed into cutting rates, and we should call him out.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. So meanwhile, the other potentially big piece of news from the weekend was announced by the House Judiciary Committee with almost no fanfare whatsoever on a Friday afternoon. Chairman Jerry Nadler announced that they're formally asking for access to secret grand jury information related to Robert Mueller's investigation, a step that Nadler says is basically, quote, in effect, the launch of an impeachment investigation. Here's what he said to George Stephanopoulos, quote, we have impeachment resolutions before the committee. We are conducting investigations to determine whether we should report those impeachment resolutions to the House or direct our own and report those to the House. Pushed again on whether that qualifies as an impeachment investigation, Nadler said, we're investigating whether to approve articles of impeachment before the committee. Since Mueller testified on Wednesday, more than a dozen Democrats, including a member of Pelosi's leadership team, have announced their support for impeachment, which now makes 107 of 235 House Democrats, only 11 short of a majority of the caucus. Not a majority of the House, but of the caucus. Guys, what's going on with this one? Is this progress? Is this semantics? What do we think?
Yes. So there was a bunch of really interesting arguments made after this or sort of around this, around what it means to say we are seeking information to see if we should have an impeachment inquiry. Because there is a kind of paradox at the heart of a lot of this conversation, which is in order to decide whether to launch an impeachment inquiry, in some sense, you have to have an impeachment inquiry, right? So when, there's all this debate about, why should we do impeachment? It's not going to succeed. It's not going to succeed. Well, one of the reasons you do an impeachment inquiry is because it is widely recognized that through the power of impeachment, Congress has a stronger hand than its usual regulatory oversight because it's a power vested in Congress to investigate the executive, and they would have greater access to materials, and it might be easier to hold the administration accountable. But then the question becomes, well, when does Congress get those powers? When does Congress gain the powers that come with an impeachment inquiry? Well, there shouldn't really be a paradox. You shouldn't have to, if you need the powers to check whether or not the president should be impeached, it's sort of well, let me say it again. If you can't, you shouldn't have to impeach the president to determine whether or not the president should be impeached just to gain the powers of impeachment. So, right? But no, that's right.
Yeah, I think so.
So I think that's why Nadler is doing this little dance about in effect. But I think the reason I think it's ultimately a good thing is that it is signaling to the country, to the Congress itself, to the administration, to the courts, that this body is going to begin to use the inherent powers vested in Congress to investigate the president with regard to impeachment, whether or not the word is officially invoked in a committee vote.
So there. I want to separate, because I think this might help people understand this, sort of the legal argument for this versus the political argument for this. I think legally there could be, we'll see what the courts decide, an argument for doing this. Because what they're trying to do, basically, is get the versions of the Mueller report that are currently redacted because they have to do with grand jury proceedings, unredacted. So how do you do that? Well, during Watergate, the way that they were able to get grand jury information is argue to the court that they need it because not for investigative reasons, but because grand jury information is needed for a judicial proceeding. And in the past, courts have only given out grand jury information when it's connected to another judicial proceeding. So during Watergate, they were able to say, during Watergate, the House Judiciary voted to begin an impeachment inquiry. But basically they argued, we're in a judicial proceeding, it's called impeachment, so give us the grand jury info. So Nadler is trying to do this now. So Nadler wants to argue to the court, we are in a judicial proceeding right now called impeachment. He doesn't want to just say we're investigating. Now, he didn't formally vote for it, but he's hoping the court will side with them anyway on this.
Because you need to, it's a funny question, right? Like, how can you decide to impeach the president without the information that you need to make that decision. He needs the access to the information. Like, anyway, you can cut that part.
Yeah, I mean, look, I personally feel I've read a lot about the ways that starting an impeachment proceeding may or may not help our legal standing and our ability to get documents. I believe those who think we can, but I don't totally understand it all. This conversation does underpin for me how bizarre the narrative was coming out of the Mueller hearings themselves. I mean, like a dozen members of Congress came out in favor of impeachment after Mueller testified, and you were reading stories in Politico that were like, Donald Trump had a great week. What planet do we live in? The need to like be able to give him a win every once in a while for some faux balance is so absurd. So who knows where we'll end up here? I mean, the people I've talked to, some journalists, some people who work in government say Pelosi sincerely believes that impeachment would tear the party apart and is just terrified of it politically. I do not know what they're basing that on. I have not seen any polling or evidence, but if that's where they stand, it does feel like they're going to be a massive roadblock for a long time. But it's the fact that Jerry Nadler is like pretty publicly moving in the path of impeachment is interesting.
Well, and you touched on the political reasons for this. So you might ask, why not just vote within the Judiciary Committee to open an impeachment inquiry so that you've strengthened your court case even more to say that it's part of a judicial proceeding? Well, clearly, there's still some anxiety about holding a vote in the Judiciary Committee. Nadler is clearly for this, but he has apparently worked out the language and everything he was going to say on Friday with Pelosi, with Pelosi's blessing. So she's on board with this whole thing where you get to start an impeachment inquiry and you get the legal power that comes with that, hopefully, without making anyone take the vote that could sort of, in her mind at least, hurt politically.
Well, I also think there's a flip side to that too, which is I think part of the reason they want to do it this way is they understand that once there's an actual, whether it's articles of impeachment or whatever, a motion to proceed to impeachment, whatever process they land on, very hard to vote no for a Democrat right now. Very, very hard. They sincerely, Democratic voters believe that Donald Trump should be impeached. Everyone recognizes, even those who aren't in favor of impeachment, that Donald Trump has committed impeachable offenses. From a moral point of view, I believe nobody wants to go on record being against this thing. So I think a little bit there's an understanding that there's a big snowball at the top of a very snowy hill. And
this is what Schiff said to me last week.
And once you push it, that's it. It's going to roll all the way to the bottom. And so they have a few more bites at the apple this way before that process starts. Because once that vote happens and it's signaled, and they signal to the country that they're pursuing this, every Democrat will have to go on record. It will end up in the House floor, and then every Democrat will have to go on record again. And they may get there, and they may ultimately be okay with getting there, but they're not there yet.
There was some polling out of the hearings that showed that it didn't really change people's minds one way or the other, and no surprise there. It was one day of testimony. But 54% of people who, I guess, watched or had understanding of the Mueller hearings said they don't have any confidence in the U.S.'s ability to defend itself against another electoral attack. If you're looking for pretty firm ground to stand on when it comes to an indictment of Donald Trump, there's a path. Why don't we demagogue that? Demagogue's the wrong word. Why don't we lift up this critical issue about our ability to have a fair and free election from foreign interference and talk about that all day? I mean, that should be part of impeachment.
I was just going to bring this up. At some point, we have to stop talking about the process of impeachment and all the legal processes and all this. I realize they have to go through that now, but the reason that all of us here are for impeachment is not the moral case, not purely the moral case, as we've said, and it's not because we believe he's going to get convicted in the Senate. It's because we believe that Democrats will have the attention of the nation on them to tell a story about the president's corruption and criminality that will hopefully assist in removing him from power in the election of 2020. So you got to start telling the story, and we've got to start talking about the issues where he has, been very corrupt or when he's broken the law and all that kind of stuff. You've got to tell the story and start talking about fucking process all the time.
Given that out of the Mueller hearing, we had several more Democrats come out in favor of impeachment, a pundit narrative that says it lacked drama, but a recognition that a lot of the substance was quite bad for Trump.
Right.
We're literally a Hans Zimmer score away underneath an impeachment inquiry.
Ooh. Sounds like a Now This video.
From being able to tell the story we have to tell. We just need that. We just need a kind of just a solid orchestral hum.
And I will say, we have wondered aloud if Pelosi is just trying to drag this process out so that, we can get to the 2020 elections and say, well, now it's too late to do impeachment. She said over the weekend, the decision will be made in a timely fashion. This is not endless. So she could, we'll take her at her word, right? She said that it's not going to be a dragged out process, going to be endless. So, maybe she's got something.
It's just a tale of two parties, right? Like Democrats in the House are having a good faith discussion or debate about the process that would lead to impeachment. The 2020 candidates are talking about like Medicare for all or a public option.
Yeah.
Trump's attacking major American cities. And today he said that he was down at ground zero on 9/11 helping out and basically compared himself to a first responder. I mean, they are just full crazy and we are still having these same conversations.
I was driving into the office today and I had NPR on. And it was, I laugh because it's you catch yourself forgetting the timeline in which you live, and then the news starts and it's like it's one of the anchors saying Donald Trump continued his attacks on the city of Baltimore today.
It's like we're living in a fucking bad Veep episode. One more thing on the polling, because you mentioned that ABC poll that showed that didn't really change people's minds. Fox News had a poll last week.
Yes.
47% of the country favor either impeachment or impeachment and removal, and only 45% oppose impeachment. That's a Fox News poll. So Nancy Pelosi, take a look at that one. All right, let's talk about the primary. 20 Democratic presidential candidates will meet in Detroit on Tuesday and Wednesday nights this week for a second round of debates. The first night of the debates, which are being hosted by CNN, will include Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, Pete Buttigieg, and Beto O'Rourke. The second night will put Joe Biden back on the stage with Kamala Harris and also include Cory Booker and Julian Castro. And for all the other presidential candidates, their performance at this debate may determine whether we ever see them on this debate stage again. You guys want to talk about why?
Dun, dun, dun.
Because the next debate has much stricter rules. I believe as of right now, 5 to 7 have qualified.
6.
I'm sorry, 6.
6 have qualified.
6 have now officially qualified.
So the top. Yeah. So
Booker just qualified, right?
Not yet, but he's close. He's going to qualify because he's almost at the number of donors. He got the polling. So just,
that's what it was.
Just to let everyone know, it is 130,000 individual donors to qualify for the September debates. 130,000 individual donors and at least 2% in 4 national polls. So qualified are Bernie, Biden, Kamala, Warren, Pete, and Beto. Cory Booker's very close. He's got the polls. He's almost there in the donors. Yeah, he might have done it last night.
I think he qualified today.
So he's in. And so then the only other people who are close are Klobuchar. She has the polling but not the donors. Yang and Castro, who has the donors but not the polls, and I think Yang doesn't have the polls yet either, or maybe the donors, either or. But no one else is close. So that would be, even if all of those make it, that would be 10 people on the debate stage. That would get us down to one stage in one night. I think it's a big deal that people are not focusing on.
It's also a big deal for me because if it goes to 2 nights, the second night is during Radio City, Love It or Leave It, which is very frustrating.
My God.
So a lot of things are at stake here.
There's some. These debate rules are interesting, and I'm glad we're about to hit a winnowing period. You are starting to see reports about the money Democratic candidates are now spending on acquiring donors.
Which is such a funny thing.
It's like a tech
spending
company.
money to get people to give you money.
It's like
it's multi-level marketing.
No, it's more like you're like an
well get yoga
Uber
pants.
or Lyft, and you're entering a new market, and you have these massive acquisition costs to get a user. But it's just so stupid.
So, in this debate that we're about to have this week, what do you do to get noticed if you are one of these candidates who have not qualified for September yet, and you've got a couple months to do this?
It's even you asking that question is like making me feel nervous on their behalf.
Me too.
Because this isn't. Launch a broadside against another candidate that is so sophisticated and sharp it attacks them and makes you look like a president with a unique case for why you should be in that job.
You know the scene.
Well put.
You know the scene in Airplane when there's a passenger who's sort of having like a mental breakdown, and then like one of them slaps her to try to like calm her down, and there's a whole line of people, including a professional boxer, and then there's a woman with a gun. Like that's everybody lining up to go after Joe Biden. That is how this one is going down right now. You're seeing like some amazing sort of mini opposition research about how Gillibrand staffers.
I was going to check the Gillibrand one.
They've been like, what was it, like newspapers.com or something like that? They've been like flagging all these articles about Biden's record, preparing to go after him. It's
apparently there's this hit on Biden that Gillibrand has been previewing or quietly previewing that he had voted against the expansion of the child tax credit, which
Right.
on a policy level, of course you should say that that's a contrast. But what Gillibrand said publicly was some Democratic candidates, quote, do not believe necessarily that it's a good idea that women work outside the home. There's a slight difference between that and opposing the child care tax credit, which I am for. You should be for expanding the child care tax credit, but I don't know if that's a fair hit on that one.
A fair hit.
A number of other candidates have previewed contrasts with Biden over the last weeks. Booker on criminal justice reform, Castro on immigration, which is an interesting one. Castro may try to do to Biden what he did to Beto. It's interesting. Castro saying some of us have learned the lessons of the Obama administration on immigration. Biden hasn't. It's Castro is saying that because he knows that other people are going to, if he's going to go after people on immigration, other people are going to say, well, you not only were part of the Obama administration on immigration, you never had any problems with it while you were part of the administration, and you testified on their behalf at times about their immigration policies. So at least he can tell a story like, yeah, I did that, and I've come to see that some of them were bad. I mean, I was part of the administration. I think that, too.
Sure.
And Biden would just sort of figure out some version of that answer to pivot away from some of these policies themselves. He would be in a much better place. Like, you're allowed to evolve. You're allowed to learn new things and improve your understanding of policy from the 80s until now. Embrace it.
That would be a good answer from him. I mean, what do you think Biden should do at this point? Like, what would you be telling the vice president, knowing that all of these hits are coming?
Oh, I would say just take the hits and then ask for someone else to speak.
I mean, he's got to be ready on this substance, right, to respond substantively and defend his own record, or at least offer some, explanation for how he's maybe evolved or learned more over time. But I think what a lot of voters are looking for is for him to punch back really hard. And given that half of these attacks have now been previewed, I would want to tee him up to look like a fighter, because I think everyone wants someone who will get at a debate with Donald Trump and be ready to punch him in the mouth rhetorically.
Yeah, and he did say he was too polite. In the last debate.
That's a word.
Jokes aside, if I were looking at someone like Biden, what I would be saying is you need to respond forcefully, but put it in a frame of, I've been in the arena for 40 years. I've gotten a lot right. I've gotten some things wrong. I've evolved and I've changed like any person has, but here's what I would do. And here's the experience I bring to do these things that we need to do to fix this country. And we can spend all day going over our records, and then attack.
Yeah.
But we need to talk about what we'll do to fix this country because this election is so important. If that would be the argument I would be making if I were Joe Biden.
So, I wonder what someone like Kamala Harris does to keep up the momentum that she gained from the last debate. And I was wondering about that. And then today, on Monday, she released her own Medicare for All plan, which I was surprised that she did. But she was one of the first co-sponsors of Bernie Sanders' Medicare for All bill. She stood with him at the press conference when he announced it. She has been sort of, trying to, she has been, I would say, unclear on various aspects of Medicare for All, and
like
which she
eliminating
supports,
private insurance.
eliminating private insurance so she's been going back and
And
forth.
at times clear, then unclear, then clear again.
Yeah, so today she decided, okay, I'm going to put my own spin on the plan. And her plan would basically say there's a 10-year transition to single payer in addition to the 4-year transition that is envisioned in Bernie's plan. She also would maintain a role for private insurance companies who are tightly regulated by the government, like Medicare Advantage plans under Medicare. So basically, at the end of all this, hopefully everyone's on one Medicare plan. But if there are private insurance companies that want to do a version of the government's Medicare plan that are tightly regulated, the government still sets the pricing, the government still has all these restrictions, then you can play in our system, but only if you play by our rules, is basically what it is. And the other key thing she does is on financing. Bernie Sanders basically says that anyone who makes over $29,000 a year will face a tax increase to pay for his plan. His argument is, well, you might have a tax increase, but you won't be paying premiums or copays or deductibles anymore, so it'll be a wash at the end. Kamala Harris says the only people who will pay higher taxes are those who make over $100,000, and then she makes up the difference by taxing stock trades, a small amount as well. So that's what she. Why do we think she did this?
I think she could not continue this. She could say she was full-throatedly behind Bernie's plan. She could say she was against Bernie's plan. But I think she could no longer do this sort of tightrope without telling people where she was walking towards, because there was a lot of, is she going to raise her hand? Is she not going to raise her hand? Where is she on private insurance? She said she was for it. Now she said she was for getting rid of it. Then she said she wasn't. She raised her hand. Then she said she didn't understand the question. She was getting attacked for her positions, and so she needed to say, here's my view, here's where I have landed, so that she could actually articulate not just a kind of abstract position, but like lay out a policy.
Yeah, I mean, also some recent polling suggests that eliminating private insurance is a very unpopular position. I've seen other anecdotal evidence that it's particularly unpopular with African American voters. I think CNN reported that. So this new plan seems to account for a lot of the political deficiencies that people see in Bernie's plan. Okay, interesting. Like, let me try to say this right. Okay, I mean, maybe that will help, but entire elections have been fought and lost over being for something before you were against it, for being perceived as flip-flopping on an issue. I mean, look at John Kerry. Look at every race before John Kerry, basically, when politics went crazy these last few years. I mean, so it will be interesting to see if Democrats or people on stage go after on these policy changes during the debates, because how she deals with that will say a lot about how she would deal with that against Trump.
Yeah, I mean, on the substance, I find myself more in line with Kamala's new plan, with Medicare for America, which is Beto's plan, some of the more robust public options, but I still think Medicare for America and Kamala Harris's plan are better, just because, not because I'm against single payer ultimately, but because I think the transition is so difficult, not just politically difficult, but substantively difficult, that it should be handled in a gradual way. Not gradual in saying, oh, we'll pretend to get there someday, but wink, wink, we won't. Like really gradual, like making sure that if we're having everyone in the entire country on one government plan, that it is a good plan, that people like it, that it works, that it's proven to work, right? And so that we have some time. I mean, 4 years, which is what Bernie's plan envisioned, it seems like a long time, but we had a couple years to get the Affordable Care Act together, and that wasn't enough time, honestly. Like we still, healthcare.gov launched and there was all these problems. So it takes a long time to transition to some of these plans. Now, Bernie's argument, and maybe Elizabeth Warren's because she's on his plan too, their argument would be, you know what, it's easier if we just do this at once, all hold hands and jump together. And also, the more you have private insurers, the longer you have private insurers involved in this shit, the more money government's going to spend and waste, and it's not going to be as efficient. But I think the biggest point here on the politics is we are now headed into a phase where relatively small differences between these candidates' healthcare plans are going to get blown up into these huge fucking fights. And I do want everyone to make sure that, like, you're going to hear, I mean, we're already hearing, like, Sanders attacked Kamala Harris's plan, Biden attacked Kamala Harris's plan, Kamala Harris attacks both of their plans. I think the attacks are going to seem like a bigger deal than the actual details, the difference in the details of the plan, right? We are all headed towards universal coverage with heavy government regulation of prices and costs. That's what they all want. How fast you get there, how generous it is, all these are details worth debating, but let's not lose sight of the fact that all of these candidates are in a very good place on healthcare.
I'm also just interested in how the debate over the Kamala plan goes, because it is actually a genuinely kind of new offering into the public, the Biden cap public option, very robust public option, some with automatic enrollment for, say, children into a public plan versus.
And she has that,
yes.
Newborns and uninsured are automatically enrolled.
Yes, and then you have the kind of the Bernie Medicare for all plan, and there's a variety of single player plans, but that's sort of the alternative. It's interesting how this does seem to sit between the two in a lot of ways, and I'm curious how it ultimately is perceived, right? Because, one of the gaps, the public option focused plans, they try to bridge this gap between the 40% or so Americans who say they want Medicare for all versus the 70% of Americans who support a Medicare for all who want it type plan. And this seems to kind of sit between both of those ideas while preserving private insurance, but in a much more restricted way. So I'm just curious how it ultimately is perceived by other Democrats on the stage, by Democratic voters, by political journalists covering it, because it is, I don't know, it's an interesting plan. That's all.
Yeah. Okay, when we come back, Tommy, we'll talk to DeRay McKesson.